Okay, so we ready to go? And I had a couple of questions.
Then I send it to you.
It's okay. Just to make sure that I'm getting confused now that we're getting toward the end of all of this and so we've been jumping around. Did we, in the earlier classes in the fall, talk about chapter 25 and those parables?
I think so.
Or we started to talk about them and we didn't get to them? We didn't get to them. We did talk about 25. Okay, thank you. That's what I thought when I got there. I was like, yeah, but it's all part of the same. Anyway, we're starting with 21, so I don't know if we'll get to 25, and I don't mean to repeat myself if we do. What we're doing now is we're moving from the Sea of Galilee down to the Jerusalem area. Bethany, Bethphage, and the Mount of Olives, Jerusalem. I was looking for a better picture of Jerusalem in Jesus' time to give you some examples of where things were, what it looked like. A couple of things. One is in the walls of Jerusalem, and some of them are from the Byzantine Empire, some of them are from later editions, some from the Crusades, and then some go back all the way to the original walls of David's Jerusalem. In the walls of Jerusalem, there are a number of gates into the city. And of course, Jesus refers to the one of the Camel's Gate. But the most famous of them is called the Golden Gate, or the Gate of Gold. And that actually faces out into the hillside, into the valley, the Kidron Valley, which is a cemetery. And you go across the valley and you come up to the Mount of Olives. So it's not a far distance between the Mount of Olives and Jerusalem. It's a hike. It's a hike down and a hike back up. But part of that is it's a very famous gate, and it's very famous biblically because the Messiah is supposed to enter through the Golden Gate. And when he comes, all the dead will be raised. So those in the cemetery are buried so that they're facing the Golden Gate, so as the Messiah comes at the end of time, they will all rise from their graves and walk into Jerusalem with the Messiah. Now, here we're going to get, and we talked about this once before, in terms of Jesus entering Jerusalem. And of course, the people shouting, as he's entering Jerusalem, the people shouting Hosanna, and that whole scene that we get on Palm Sunday, they're not the Jerusalem citizens. They're the people who come with him. So they're the people from Galilee, from Capernaum, and that area, who are coming with him, and of course are highlighting him for the residents of Jerusalem. As we begin chapter 21, it says, when they drew near Jerusalem and came to Bethphage on the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two of his disciples to get the donkey that he was going to ride on, the ass and the colt that he was going to take. Bethphage means the place of the unripened fig. And the fig tree is one of the allegorical symbols of Israel. The vineyard and the fig tree are both allegorical symbols of Israel. And of course, if the fig is unripened, that means it is not ready yet. It is not ready for the Messiah. So he's coming from Bethphage. Send to the disciples, go into the village opposite you, immediately you'll find an ass tethered and a colt with her. Untie them, bring them here to me. If anyone should ask, say in reply, the master has need of them, they will send them on. It happens, and again it happens so that what was spoken through the prophet might be fulfilled. Say to the daughter Zion, behold, your king comes to you, meek and riding on an ass, and on a colt, the foal of a beast of burden. The other time, there's the two prophecies where this is used, Genesis, and then Zechariah, I believe it is, where this one is coming from. But also, David, when he has to leave Jerusalem because of the exile and revolution of his son, the rebellion of his son Absalom, he leaves riding on an ass. So at Bethage, they gave him an ass and a colt, and he was riding out of the city on that to humiliation. So Jesus, riding back in from Bethage, the son of David, which of course he's been called the son of David throughout the gospel, the son of David rides back into Jerusalem, this time not to humiliation, but to shouts of acclamation. So again, trying to show the opposite, linking Jesus back up to David, and is at the same time fulfilling the prophecy in Zechariah, and also fulfilling the prophecy from Genesis chapter 49. So both of those are coming, or all of that's coming true at the same time as he's walking through. Jesus obviously would also be cognizant of where these prophecies are from. Having or being a teacher, he would know these and also then help to fulfill them. So some of it is part of his plan in a sense to make sure that the prophecy is being fulfilled. And he comes in, and of course they're singing what we sing at Mass every Sunday, right? Or every day. Hosanna to the Son of David. Okay? Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna the highest. So before we encounter Jesus in the Eucharist, we welcome him with a shout of acclamation. We probably don't think about that way when we sing the Holy, Holy, but that's the whole point of it. The Holy, Holy is coming from two parts. The first part from the prophet Isaiah, from his call, where the seraphim are surrounding the temple, and he's being called. He sees the vision, and the seraphim are flying up and down in front of the temple, in front of the sanctuary, saying, Holy, Holy, Holy is the Lord God of hosts. And then, of course, the second part, which we get from the gospel of Jesus entering into Jerusalem, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, Hosanna in the highest. So there's a linking of Isaiah's vision as well as the entry. And that's what we use in terms of our Mass, and that's, of course, at the beginning of the Eucharistic prayer. So before we actually get to the Eucharistic prayer and the consecration, when Jesus is on the altar, we acclaim his coming by repeating what was said. As he comes in now, as he comes into Jerusalem, he goes to the temple area, which would be the most likely place to gather people. When we talk about the temple in Jerusalem, as I was going through this, the size of the temple, and most of the time when you see a map, you don't realize that, they have in Jerusalem, they have an area where they have the whole city of Jesus' time kind of mapped out and showed you where everything is, where Pontius Pilate's house was, where the temple was, and all that. But you don't get a full context of it, and when you go up to Temple Mount, you don't get a full context of the size of the area, mostly because there's two mosques there. So there's the Dome of the Rock as well as the Great Mosque that's on the temple wall. And of course the temple itself has been destroyed, so all you have is the western wall. So you don't really see fully what that is. You're talking an area of the temple that covers what would be the equivalent of 35 or so football fields. So you're talking a huge amount of land. The temple was one of the greatest buildings in the Roman Empire. And Herod was he was building it up. Of course, this is Herod's temple. This isn't Solomon's temple. That was destroyed by the Babylonians. So this is Herod's temple. The first Herod had begun it in about 20 BC. And it really wasn't finished until 63 AD. So it took them over 80 years to build this monstrosity. But even so, it was quite large by the time Jesus entered the temple. That was 40 years into the construction. Which also explains why the disciples are marveling over everything that's going on, because the work is still going on. So you're seeing the goldsmiths adorn different things. You're seeing them put up the windows, all that kind of stuff. So you're seeing the work go on, and they're marveling at this. So it's right there for everybody to see. But this is a huge area. The temple itself is a significant building by itself, but the temple area also includes that area of preparation for sacrifice, so all the animals are in that area. The animals you used to buy the animals on the way into the temple, not in the temple. They used to have markets outside, but they kind of brought everything inside to make sure that you were getting the pure animal, the clean animal, because it had to be an unblemished sacrifice. So then the temple priests had more control over what's going on. They also got a cut of the money, but. So they brought that in. into the area. So part of this big area was kind of the market where you have the various sacrifices, the animals being offered. The other, of course, is the temple was an area that was attracting pilgrims from all over the world. Okay, remember that the Jews had been twice conquered, or 3 times conquered already, not counting the Romans, who actually were invited in to conquer them. But they had already been conquered by the Assyrians, they had been conquered by the Babylonians, they had been conquered by the Greeks. And so there was a dispersion of Jewish people to various areas. There's a large Jewish community in Rome and in many other cities in the Middle East. So pilgrims would come from all over to come to the temple. So part of making sure that you got your animal was you needed to buy the animal, and they're coming in with all kinds of money. So of course you're going to have money changers to change your Roman denarius into Tyrian denarii, or shekels, in order to be able to buy the animal. So the temple only accepted Jewish money, but if you had Roman money or Greek money or somebody else's money, you changed the money first, and then you bought the animal from the temple animals, and then you went in and offered it to sacrifice. So of course there's a lot of money being made, because anytime you go to a money changer, everybody gets their cut. So they're making money, and I'm sure that part of the temple priests were taking a cut on the stall as well. So they're getting a cut over here, they're getting a cut over here, as well, of course, making your offering, making your sacrifice.
Is that the forerunner to Chicago?
No, not Chicago, but there are probably places like it. So all that's going on. So this is a huge area. So when Jesus comes in, of course, the temple is the place that everybody goes to, not simply to worship, but it was a marketplace. It was, in all sense, a marketplace. And like most other cities, if you don't find that here in Chicago, but in many other cities, particularly in old world cities or in South and Central America, you'll find the main plaza of the town is centered. The government building is one side, the church is on another side, the court is on another side, and the presidential palace is on the other side. So the whole Zocalo, or the main square of the town, is surrounded by these 4 important buildings, of which the church is one, the court is another, the government is the third, and then the leader's house is the other side of it. So again, outside the temple is where Pontius Pilate's house was, on one of the sides. So when the Pharisees are going from one place to the other, they're not going very far. But you have that whole market sense there. So everybody's going to be there. And of course, when he comes in to destroy the temple, or when he comes in and you have the cleansing of the temple, Jesus entered the temple area and drove out all those engaged in selling and buying there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. And he said to them, "It is written, my house shall be a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of thieves." And of course, what's happening, there's a couple of things happening. The money changers are, of course, they're money changers, so they take a cut. It's not the value, which is part of it. But 2, the other side of that is they're bringing foreign coin into the temple. Even though it's not going into the temple treasury, it's in the temple area. And the temple area includes everything that's part of that walled area. So it's not just inside the church building, but it's everything that's part of it. It's as if, this building is part of the church campus. So this is all one, and it should all be dedicated then to God. So there's some good reason for it, the convenience of people, but then of course, where's the focus of the people? Is the focus on the offering the sacrifice, or is the focus on the exchange of goods that are going on in the other commerce that's happening? While he's within the temple area, the next thing happens is very common and very forgotten, but very important. The blind and the lame approach him in the temple area, and he cures them. Now, this isn't very uncommon. Jesus is curing all kinds of people in the gospel, but that was up in Galilee. Now he's at the temple. Now he's at the house of God, and he's curing them there, which is much more significant, even though it's kind of just passed off to the side. But it shows that if he's going to cure, again, the question of, does Jesus have the power to do this? Is he really coming from God? Well, if he's curing them in the temple, then he must be coming from God. It must be what God wants, because now it's part of the temple process. He's there in God's house to do this. So the chief priests and the scribes, they saw the wondrous things he was doing, and the children crying out in the temple area, Hosanna to the Son of David. They were indignant and said to him, "Do you hear what they are saying?" And Jesus said, "Yes, and have you never read in the text, this is Psalm 8, out of the mouths of infants and nurslings you have brought forth praise." And leaving them, he went out of the city, and there he spent to Bethany, where he spent the night. So again, Bethany is not very far from Jerusalem. They're a couple of kilometers distance. It looks further on this map, but this is all reasonably close to each other. So rather than staying in Jerusalem, he went to Bethany, where of course he had friends, Martha and Mary, Lazarus. So he stayed there instead for the night. Next thing Matthew does, and this is a story that Mark develops a little bit more, and there's a difference between Matthew, Mark, and Luke in the story, and the difference is in the timing. So next, as he comes back the next morning, and of course we're in Holy Week now, right? So Jesus has entered Jerusalem amidst the praise, so we call that Palm Sunday. So we're in Holy Week, must be Holy Monday, or Monday of Holy Week. And he comes back, and he goes to pick a fig from the fig tree, but there's no figs. Now, one gospel says that it's not time for the figs. This one just says that the fig tree hadn't borne any, so he curses the tree. And in Matthew's gospel, it immediately withers up. In Mark's gospel, it takes a couple of days to wither up. They come back later. And also in Luke's gospel, they come back later. There's timing differences. Matthew, though, uses this story to show the immediacy and the effect of the power of Jesus' words. So, because he's running everything now to a climax. So things are going to move much more quickly. Whereas before he was more developed in his stories, now he's condensing them. So he's taking those other stories that the other Gospels have, and he's telling them very quickly and condensing them at a much faster rate. And of course the disciples are amazed that it immediately dries up, and he uses that as a lesson to faith. He uses that as a lesson to faith, not as a sense of, well, it didn't do what it was supposed to do, but in that sense that if you have enough faith, then of course he uses the example, you could say to the mountain, be thrown into the sea and it would obey you. But he wants to highlight that faith allows us to do much greater things than we think it can do.
So if you have faith, the sibs would have grown?
I'm sorry? Oh, he could have made the figs grow, yes. Which you would think would be a much more practical solution to the problem, wouldn't it? So rather than cursing the fig tree for not growing, for figs, you'd think he would have said, you should have some figs on you, and there should have been figs right then and there.
Right.
That would be a practical solution to the problem.
That's the Wizard of Oz.
But the issue of not having figs is,
Because you don't have any faith.
well, it's not just about not having faith, it's also about whether or not your faith is producing fruit. Your faith is actually showing itself forth. Because again, this is going to be a prelude to judgment. Okay, all of this is coming up to the judgment that comes up in chapter 25. So as the judgment on each one of us. Okay, so there are many stories in here that in these 4 chapters. That's why I grouped them all together. There's many stories in here that call us into a sense of judgment. So this fig tree does not produce fruit, therefore it is judged.
It's no good?
As lacking what it was supposed to have. And in the same way, because you don't know when Jesus is coming. So you need to be ready. Your life needs to be in such a way that you are ready. You need to be able to show the good deeds that you've done. If you haven't done them...
It means you go to hell?
Well, you're not going to be with
isn't that what's happening? Ultimately, we are, on our way somewhere. And if our way is, if we're living the way of the Lord, then we should have the fruit of the Lord to show for our efforts.
Right.
And if we're not living that way, then we will have nothing to show or to give to the Lord when He comes. And that means we are cursed when He comes. When we are judged, we will be weighed and judged lacking.
Oh, can't I get a pass on that?
You better be ready.
Well,
No.
I'm not going to speak for God, but I am going to tell you that Matthew here And the Bible does not give you a pass. So your pass is between now and the time you get home to do something good. So,
See, don't you think that hell is the lack of not being with God? That's hell, wouldn't it be?
Right.
There you go. You don't have to go and
Well,
fire
we
your
don't go,
brimstone.
never mind, I don't go into that.
okay. So he comes back to the, say, when he closes the section, whatever you ask for in prayer with faith, you will receive. Okay? Whatever you ask for in prayer with faith, you will receive.
That makes,
Now that has a whole lot of different levels of interpretation, doesn't it? Because of course you say, well, I asked for $1 million, I didn't get it. And I really believe in God, why didn't I get my $1 million?
You gotta buy a ticket first.
Well, yeah, you gotta buy the ticket.
And maybe we
The other side of that is, does your faith really call you to ask for $1 million?
But that's kind of out of kilter, isn't it?
What do you mean?
Why would you want $1 million?
That's what I'm saying. Does your faith really call you to ask for $1 million? So the phrase is whatever you ask for in prayer with faith. So just because you're asking for this because you think it would be good for you, does your faith really call you to that prayer? Or is that prayer really coming from your desire or coming from your temptation? So again, while it doesn't seem like a caveat, it's a very important caveat, isn't it? Because it says, wait a minute, whatever you ask for in prayer, with faith. With faith. And even when you ask for things like healing for someone else, or peace in the world, or lack of war, some of those things, are they your desire or are they God's will? What does your faith call you to pray for? Almost always our faith calls us to pray for God's will be done.
so it's better to pray for somebody else instead of yourself, right? I mean,
No,
Of course.
not necessarily.
I mean, no, you should pray for yourself, but it's always better to pray for someone else because you're giving you're showing generosity. Are you trying to find this way into heaven now? You're worried about the fig tree, or
You gotta understand, he's an accountant, so
I'm not worried.
you're just trying to weigh things out and they come on scale here?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
He's got his credits.
Okay, well let's move forward. So he comes back into the temple area. The chief priests and the elders of the people approach him as he was teaching. So now he's back in the temple and now he's preaching because of course that's where teachers and preachers go, in the temple area. He's teaching to the people, and they come up and they question him. And the first thing they want to question him is what authority do you have? And Jesus, there's a rabbinic style of teaching, and part of that rabbinic style of teaching is to challenge what is out there. So it's almost like what we would call the Socratic method, where Socrates always asked his students a question and pushed them one further with one more question. Rather than giving them answers, he would make them come to the answer as he asked the questions. The rabbinic style is also to challenge people in that sense of asking a question that would challenge where they're at. So, of course, he's out there teaching, and they're going to challenge him on this, and what authority do you have? So he says, okay, let me ask you a question then. What authority did John have? Now he's not evading the question. He's not turning the tables on them, but rather he's leading them to decide what authority Jesus has. So rather than telling him I have this authority, he's leading them and say, okay, you want to know what authority I have? Let's start. What authority does John have? Where did his baptism come from? From God or from man? So, and of course, they being teachers themselves, they kind of figure out in their head, do that Bobby Fischer method, and take a few moves ahead and say, oh, wait a minute, if we say it comes from God, then he's going to come back and say you didn't believe in him. If we say it comes from man, then the crowds are all around here because he's teaching all these people, and they believe that John was a prophet. So now we're going to be in trouble with the crowd. We're going to lose face in front of them. So then they're trying to say, okay, so what's the best thing we can do? Now they're stuck because now they can't find out what authority he has because they don't want to answer the question that would lead them to know the authority. Because if they answer the question, it came from man, then of course, then they could presume that his authority also comes from man and can be denied. but they know what everybody else thinks. So of course they now want to avoid the question and avoid their own question and say, we don't know, hoping that maybe they can trap them again into telling them. So, the teacher gets frustrated enough, he keeps trying to help you find the answer, but it's frustrated, so just going to tell you the answer is the easiest thing to do. Okay? And he doesn't get trapped by that.
That never happened with Dr. Zorman and Ben Casey.
Well, it didn't happen with Jesus either. So they say, we do not know, and then Jesus says, well, then I'm not going to tell you. You're going to have to figure it out on your own. You have to, that's part of the rabbinic style. You have to figure this out. And when you're ready, come back. So, of course, he immediately then tells the parable. And this, of course, the two parables he's going to tell go back to the Pharisees and the scribes, the chief priests and the elders of the people. And as he says, he gives them two examples here in parables. The first one is the parable of the man with two sons. And the first son, and to both sons, he says, go work in the vineyard. Okay? So, go out and work in the vineyard today. The vineyard, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the classic allegories or classic symbols for the people of Israel. And in this case, it's God the Father is saying to the sons, go work in the vineyard. And who are the sons being? The chief priests and the elders. And since they're the elders, they're the elder son. Goes to the first son, go work in the vineyard. They're not the first son. He goes out, the first son says, I will not, but afterwards the son changes his mind and he goes. The man comes to this other son and says, go work in the vineyard. He says, yes, sir. And actually it's not yes, sir. In the Greek text, it's yes, Lord, or yes, master. Okay, the Bible translation, the English translation goes to sir, but it's really yes, master. And I think it was a conventional thing, but Lord or Master is a much higher title than Sir. And so the son is obviously showing reference or deference to his father, showing respect, but of course he doesn't go. So even though he's showing respect, yes, Master, yes, Lord, he doesn't go. And then of course Jesus asks, well, then which one does and he asks to the chief priest and the elders which one's doing the Father's will. And again, the usual teaching method. Here's the story. Here's the situation. Which one's going to do the will? They know which one. It's the elder son who actually did the will, even though he said no. And he says, okay, tax collectors, prostitutes, they refused the will of God. They refused to do what God told them to do at first. But because they were baptized by John, or because they heard my words, they repented. Remember the call of Matthew that we saw last week? Where Matthew and a bunch of other tax collectors came in. They hear the word of God, they repent, and then they do the work of God. Therefore, they're getting into the kingdom of heaven. You said it, not me. They're the ones who are doing the will of my Father. Those who sit there and go to the temple and say, yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, Lord. Remember the other parable about those who stand outside knocking, yes, Lord, and Jesus will say, I did not know you. They're not getting in. Not because they weren't deferential, but because they didn't do what was supposed to be done. He repeats the parable then, does it with another twist on it, and again with the vineyard image. Here another parable, there's a landowner who planted a vineyard, put a hedge around it, dug a winepress in it, and built a tower. This sounds like it's just out of Isaiah, chapter 5, I think it is. Isaiah chapter 5. Isaiah sets the whole thing up as well. Also, in another image, Hosea does the same thing, but he does the same thing with a different point of view. So, but this is like repeating Isaiah's image. And Isaiah, when he's telling this image, when he gives this prophecy and uses this, he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. And he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, back in 587 BC, with the initial destruction of Jerusalem. So this is going to sound like the same thing. Leased it out to tenants and went on a journey. When vintage time came, drew near, he sent his servants to the tenants to obtain his produce. But the tenants seized the servants, one they beat, another they killed, a third they stoned. Again, he sent other servants more numerous than the first ones, but he treated these in the same way. Finally, he sent his son to them, thinking they will respect my son. A couple of things here. One is that whole sense of tenants. And I know for those of you who have been in a renting relationship, either you're the tenant or you're the landlord, there's all kinds of tenants' rights you have to deal with, or there's all kinds of, landlord rights and things like that. This is not quite the same thing, and of course, back in those days, the tenants have fewer rights because the courts weren't as lenient toward them. But the sense of the promise was, I'm not paying you a monthly rent, but at the produce, I will give you a certain percentage of the produce. Whether it's 10, 20, 40, whatever it might be. So a percentage of the produce was meant to come back to the landlord. You kept most of it for your labor, but the landlord kept the profit end of it. And so it was your standard business deal. The tenants didn't want to give their share up because that was probably their profit. And of course, they disrespect the servants. Jesus is using the servants to show profit after profit after profit. And when they kill the first set of prophets, he sends even more prophets. So this time it's God the Father, who is the owner of the vineyard, and more prophets are being sent. And finally he says, they will respect my son. This was, I think it was, I don't want to say I think it was because they can look it up right away. As soon as they get to that point. How far we've gone. John Chrysostom. I should just step with John Chrysostom. This is John Chrysostom. That line always doesn't sound right. Surely they will respect my son. If they killed the others, why would he? The first thing is, why would he send his son? They've killed all the other servants. That just seems to be the height of foolhardiness or naivete. St. John Chrysostom, in a homily and a sermon about this particular passage of the Gospel, says there's no naivete involved. Jesus, by saying this, is trying to highlight for us, or emphasize for us, the severity of their sinfulness, the severity of their fault. So that, to show how absolutely evil this is to do. And so it's not just simply the Father saying, being naive and saying, they'll respect my son if I send him. No, he's trying to emphasize this is a completely evil group of people who not only don't pay their rent, but will kill those who are sent to collect the rent, and then will kill even the landowner's son, the heir.
Well, those are just the hired people of the landowner, so they don't matter. But the son should make a difference, because if you kill the son, it's like saying you want to kill the landowner.
Of course. Well, you've cut the progeny, and therefore you've cut the length of time that he owns the land. But that's so again. It was, but the idea is to show how severe the insult is, and again, so Jesus ends it there after they kill him and says, "What do you think the landowner will do to those wicked servants?" And the Pharisees again answer, well, they'll kill him. They'll bring that wretched group to a wretched end. So again, that whole teaching sense. So now Jesus is going to use this directly again to the Pharisees. He will put the wretched men to a wretched death and lease his vineyard to other tenants who will give him the produce at the proper time. Jesus said, "Did you never read in the Scriptures, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone? By the Lord has been done and is wonderful in our eyes. Therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you." These are the people who answered the question, right? Will be taken away from you and given to people that will produce its fruit. Back to the fig tree. The one who falls on this stone will be dashed to pieces and will crush anyone on whom it falls. When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard these parables, they knew he was speaking about them, and although they were attempting to arrest him, they feared the crowds, for they regarded him as a prophet. So they weren't going to arrest him there.
But do you think that the common folk would understand that parable that easily, so these Pharisees would be, so scared? Because they were the educated ones.
Right, and they didn't understand that parable so well.
Even the common folk.
The common folk, but the Pharisees would understand that he was talking about them. Because the Pharisees always, the Pharisees looked holy to the common people. So they didn't necessarily make the connection that these guys weren't as holy as they looked. Because they had the religious power, they were telling other people what to do, so so everybody respected them because of their position, but he's challenging, knowing their thoughts, he's challenging how they're presenting themselves.
So you're telling me that he's saying that those Pharisees had no clothes?
Similarly, along those lines. Remember, this is a family Bible study, so.
I didn't say anything beyond that.
No clothes, I like that.
I can tell you something else about that.
Never mind.
Chapter 22,
Let's change.
parable of the wedding feast. So again, now we're going through three parables in a row. The third one, the kingdom of heaven now, he's changed this. So the first two were directed against the Pharisees and against their hypocrisy. Now he's changing it to a sense of the kingdom. So we're going to come up with a couple of parables here on the kingdom. And the first one is the parable of the wedding feast. And he says that the kingdom of heaven may be likened to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son, dispatched his servants to summon the invited guests at the feast, but they refused to come. A second time he sent other servants, saying to those who invited, "Behold, I prepared my banquet." One of the commentators, not this one, but the Anchor Bible series, was saying it was a very common thing in those days to basically announce the wedding, what we would call announcing the wedding, in which case then everybody would then make their plans to attend. So now we send out save the date things, and people, but when we send out a save the date, we don't get a response. We don't expect a response from people at that moment. But in the ancient culture, it was you're being invited to this, and of course, if it's the king who's doing the inviting, you don't refuse the invite. So if the king is inviting you to his son or his daughter's wedding, you don't refuse the invite. It's the king. So the summons is sent so that people know that the wedding is coming, and then the banquet is prepared. So knowing that I've sent out the invitation to 100 people, I'm the king, nobody's going to refuse me, there will be 100 people at the table, he prepares the banquet. Then when the banquet is ready, sends out the summons again, come now, the banquet's ready, and now they don't come. They refuse to come, they've got to go to their field, they've got business to do. In which kind the king is furious about that, and wants nothing to do with them, and then immediately sends out, go everywhere and fill the hall. Fill the hall up. So the hall gets filled up, the king comes in, and he sees someone who's not properly dressed for the banquet. At which time he says, "How is it you got in here without wearing a wedding garment?" And then there was some question about what all that meant. The scholars didn't say that there was specifically a wedding garment that was to be worn, but it could have been referring simply to wearing clean clothes, as opposed to wearing your Sunday best type of thing, wearing your suit instead of wearing your work clothes. So the basic idea was you got to the banquet, but you're not ready.
You're not presentable.
You're not presentable. You're not, and how is it you came here and you're not presentable?
Okay, in the commentary it says that they had the banquet. A year later, the groom first got his wife. They waited that long.
I don't remember reading anything about that.
They
In your commentary, it says that?
I thought
I didn't say anything about that. That doesn't make sense.
that was
So,
You're talking about me talking about it, family.
well, it's not. It doesn't make sense on a lot of levels. Although you have Jacob who worked for 7 years in order for the right to have the wedding with his wife, and then of course he was tricked into the wrong wife, and so he had to work another 7 years to get the right wife. So his father-in-law tricked him for 14 years, made him work for 14 years before he would let him marry his daughters. At least the daughter he wanted.
Oh, just the one you wanted.
Well, he wanted the younger one, but the father gave him the older one first and said, "Oh, I can't let the younger one get married till the older one's married." And of course, he didn't find out until after the fact.
That would be like two. That would be a bigamy, wouldn't it?
Well, there was a lot of bigamy back then. It was acceptable at that point.
I read it someplace.
I'm not saying that it didn't, that's not possible. It's just I didn't see that.
I Okay,
So.
good.
Sister?
When we got to this parable, I always felt sorry for the people that didn't have the wedding garment because well, maybe they couldn't afford it. But somewhere I heard a commentary that they always had extra wedding garments there for people to put on who didn't look presentable. So there was no excuse.
As I said, the couple of commentators I looked at were in disagreement. One thought there was a wedding garment, kind of like a white robe you might wear type of thing. Another said there's no wedding garment that they know of. They just didn't exist. But it was more likely a clean suit. You know, why didn't you clean yourself up?
Why didn't you make yourself respectable?
Exactly. You're coming to a wedding. You don't wear the wrong clothes. And it's not that they didn't have the clothes, that they wore the wrong clothes. They didn't clean up.
You didn't come from the field.
It's if I were wearing shorts to Sunday Mass, okay, people would say, "Nice legs, Father, but you shouldn't be wearing shorts. You shouldn't be wearing shorts."
Just say that.
So,
I guess what's confusing is that they went out into the streets and gathered.
right,
They were
Anybody.
around.
all they could find, right,
And
exactly.
because people didn't have, weren't ready because they weren't expecting to go to this wedding.
You and sister, right? That's.
Not just-
That, I know, but first of all, it's that sense, we got this sense, okay, they came to the wedding, they should be honored for coming to the wedding. I mean, they should be thanked because they came to the wedding, the hall was empty, they filled it up, right? So we're looking at it from the wrong point of view, because if the wedding banquet is that, moment of salvation, one, you weren't invited at first. But now you're being invited in. But this is salvation. You still need to be presentable. This is the kingdom of heaven. You still need. So you didn't even have a chance to get in the door. Now you've been let in the door. But instead of saying thank you, I'll get myself dressed and ready, you say, oh, well, take me as I am because I'm good enough. Okay. It's that sense that I hear time and time, and I don't want to make people feel bad, but it's that sense you hear that I've heard time and again, you should be glad I'm at church. You shouldn't be worried about what I'm wearing. And the thing is, if you're going to church, you're going to present yourself to God. Therefore, make yourself presentable to God. You don't have to present yourself to me. I'm not going to judge you on it. But if you're standing before the throne of God and you wouldn't want to wear that, or you think that that's not appropriate, then you need to wear the clothes that are appropriate.
So you don't wear a T-shirt where you spent your last 23 vacation years.
Exactly. You don't wear the T-shirt that says, I got drunk last night.
We had a blast in Vegas.
Right, exactly. But and again, it's that sense of where are you and what's important here. Are you important because you deigned yourself to get into the feast and take care of their, you decided to eat their meal since otherwise it would go to waste? Or is the wedding feast important? Is the guest, is the host of the feast important? The king. So that's really the question, and that's what happens. It's one of those things. I'll just use myself as an example. On Sunday, I wear a suit. Whether it's really hot, really cold, I wear a suit. The rest of the week, I look like a slob. But on Sunday, I wear a suit because it's Sunday.
I never see you the rest of the week.
I'm in jeans. But that's the thing. So it's that. Pardon me? I look like a slob with the suit on?
I said no.
Oh. Thanks, Cliff.
Never mind, I'm not the suit
The suit doesn't make the man. Yes.
For me, it's more than just the clothing. It's you got an invitation to go to heaven.
Right.
And so what do you do with yourself? Do you prepare yourself spiritually?
Right.
Or do you just,
Right.
waste your time?
And the garment is just symbolic of the person. What have you put on to show yourself to be worthy to be at this feast? Okay, so, and of course from a Christian point of view, what are your works of charity? What are your acts of kindness that show you to be a guest at this feast? Not the clothes you're wearing, not because you can afford or not afford a certain style of clothing, but what have you put on in your life to show yourself to be worthy to be invited to the feast? So,
Did you prepare to come?
exactly. Or did you get caught unaware, you didn't have the fig, and so you get cursed? And of course what happens is the curse is very terrible, isn't it? Because you're talking about, the king says to his tenants, bind his hands and feet, cast them into the darkness outside where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth. Many are invited, but few are chosen.
You know, my dad always got a kick out of that one. That expression.
Many are invited, but few are chosen.
No.
Wailing.
Oh, wailing and grinding of teeth, yeah, it's a great line.
But aren't we all unworthy?
Of course we are.
So what makes us worthy? The Christ,
By preparing yourself.
right? Christ sacrificed.
We'll get into that in a couple of minutes. because there's a whole lot in that. There's a whole lot in that
I
thought.
would never feel worthy.
Right, but there's a lot that has to be unpacked in that. Right. So let's go a little bit further, and I'll get into that, because there's a lot to be unpacked with that statement. Okay, so then paying taxes to the emperor. Again, the Pharisees come back and they're trying to trip him up. So they set up another trap and say, paying taxes to the emperor. And he says, well, show me the coin. And of course, the coin has the picture of the emperor. And I forgot what it said. The coin. Well, the coin on the one side, the face of the coin says that it has a picture. It has the face of the emperor Tiberius Caesar in those days, and what it said, the son of the divine Augustus. On the back side, it said the great high priest. Now, who's pulling out the coin but a Pharisee? The coin itself is blasphemy to a Jew, right? To even have the coin in your pocket, to say that you have this great high priest, the son of the divine Augustus, to even have the coin in your pocket should be blasphemy. But the Pharisees got it there, and he's pulling it out to show to Jesus. So here it is. And of course, Jesus' response, well, if it's Caesar's picture, then give it back to Caesar. It's his coin. But part of the reason for asking that is then to say to the crowds, the Pharisees are coming to him. Should the temple tax, or should the tax to Caesar be paid, the census tax be paid? And of course, the Pharisees, being ardent nationalists, wouldn't want to pay the tax. They would kind of be against that. They wouldn't want to pay it, but they're not going to do a tax revolution, because the last time there was a revolt, there was uprising, there was a huge response by the Roman army. So they're not going to revolt, but at the same time, they don't want the tax paid. So they're trying to trip Jesus up and go back to Pilate and say he's proposing a revolution and not paying the tax. But these guys don't want to pay the tax either. However, they have the coin, which means it says to everybody else, when you see me pull out the coin, it says to all of you, oh, I'm ready to pay the tax. So I think that we shouldn't pay the tax, but I'm ready to pay my tax. So it's a huge moment of hypocrisy for the Pharisees to have the coin ready for them. And of course, it's also a moment of blasphemy when they look at the inscription on it. Question about the resurrection. So if the Pharisees failed, then they send the Sadducees up there, and that's the thing about the resurrection. And this is one of my favorite lines, because it's something that I always say all the time on it. But so the story with the Sadducees is they present this absurd case of the man who dies childless. So his brother marries the widow in order to have an heir for the child according to the law of Moses. And there's 7 brothers, and each one, dies childless, and then the widow finally dies. Now, whose wife will she be? So let's take a very simple law, make it completely absurd, and prove my point by saying, okay, it's like trying to show that Lincoln defended slavery or something. You just make it completely absurd in order to try and prove a point that you can't win. And Jesus' response to that he says to them, you are misled because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God. It's a great, I mean, you've heard me say that a lot of times about things. I say, well, they, you know, this church or that church, they've never read the Bible, even though they're Bible churches, because it's right there. So it's one of those lines that I use all the time about, well, you haven't read the scriptures, or you don't know the power of God. And then he goes on to show, and he uses the line from Moses' encounter at the burning bush. And when he talks about God, God says, when he asks who is speaking, he says, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. He doesn't say, I was the God of Abraham, because Abraham's dead, so I'm not his God anymore. I was the God of Isaac, because Isaac's dead, so I must not be his God anymore. I was the God of Jacob. I was the God that they worshipped, and now I'll be the God that you worship. I am the God of Abraham, which must mean that they're still alive. Because they must still be alive if he is still their God. So that great line, which of course everybody's saying it that way, and what does God's name mean? I am. So it's not only, you know, recognizing the name of God, but it's also recognizing the eternal life of the patriarchs, and that is offered to all of us. He moves forward with the great commandment. So again, the Pharisees come back, and this time one of the teachers comes up and says, okay, give us the greatest commandment. Again, a typical rabbinic question. And Jesus, this time he answers it, but he answers it with the prayer of the Shema Yisrael. And so he uses that as the first commandment, and then he uses the second commandment, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And he goes on to say that the whole law and the prophets depend on these two commandments, or they're built on these two commandments. Which of course only makes sense if you look at the law and look at all the laws. If you love God with your whole heart, your whole soul, your whole mind, then all the commandments follow. If you love your neighbor as well as yourself, then all the commandments follow. They all make sense in that context. And then Jesus asked them a question finally. And what is your opinion about this Messiah? Whose son is he? They replied, David's. So again, that whole thing about going back to Bethlehem and the son of David. And he said, then how does David say, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right? Again, quoting from the Psalms. Which, of course, they had no answer to. And it says that David was inspired by God to write that particular psalm. So there's this sense that the heir to David's throne must also somehow have existed before him, which refers to our belief in Christ himself. That he is, as divine, he is the Son of God. As human, he is an heir to David's throne. And it is only by the hypostasis of the divine and human nature that in Jesus Christ, that you have David being able to say, the Lord said to my Lord. And yet it's his son to sit on my throne. And that he would give his throne to his heir because it is his Lord. I'm going to bypass the woes because it's already 8 o'clock, so we'll get to the woes next time as we go to the Passion also. I'll kind of go through the woes. But I do want to get to that other question, Gloria, because it's kind of a standard question. And the real thing is, so am I worthy, right? So the Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. So what saves us? Right. Faith. Christ is he who saves us, right? Faith saves us. Now the question, though, becomes, as we look at that, what does that mean? What does faith mean? And I'm going to bypass the woes a second. We can go back to the parable of the fig tree, but if you go a little bit further in chapter 24, and you get to chapter 25, you'll find you have a couple of things. One is the question of when is the end of the world? When is this all going to happen? We don't know the hour. We don't know the day. So you must, and I'm now at chapter 24, verse 44. So you also must be prepared, for at an hour you do not expect the Son of Man will come. Okay, so stay awake. And then he talks about the faithful and the unfaithful servant. So the faithful servant is the one who does his master's will. So the faithful servant is the one who does his master's will. Not because he says, I believe in my master, or I trust my master, or I love my master. The faithful servant is the one who does his master's will. Parable of the 10 virgins. You have the wise virgins and the foolish ones. And the wise ones bring the oil, and the foolish ones don't bring extra oil. And this is another one where you always feel sorry for the virgins. Like, why did the ones who brought the oil, why didn't they share a little of their oil? How selfish can you be? Except for the fact, and we explained this last time, except for the fact that that might only have been a false alarm. And so you share your oil, now none of you are going to get in. Because you didn't bring the extra oil. And they said the groom is coming, but he doesn't come right away. And, the kind of story tells and talks about lamps and things. It might be a bad translation. Because a lamp in Roman times did not give off a lot of light. It was just a single flame in the lamp. It was more likely a torch, that they dipped in the oil and had to have the oil so it would burn brightly. So, because it's dark out, it's nighttime, so you got to have something bright. It's not going to be a single little light like a Candelaria, that you're going to be carrying in. You're going to want to welcome the groom. So it's got to be this kind of flaming thing. So the oil burns really fast on those. So if the groom doesn't come right away when they say he's coming, then you're going to need to dip in the oil again and be ready again because it's going to burn away pretty fast. So you have to be prepared, and if you don't have it, you really don't have it to share. You have to be ready at the moment. So the faithful, the wise person is one who is ready, who has what they need at the ready when the groom comes. Go to the next parable of the talents. And again, you have 3 people, each of them given different levels of talents. One is given 5 talents, one is given 2 talents, one is given 1 talent. King goes off, or he comes back. He asks, okay, what did you do with the money I gave you? What did you do with the talents I gave you? Well, you gave me 5, here's 5 more. Wonderful. You were responsible with something small. I'll put you in charge of something larger. You gave me 2, I made 2 more. Wonderful. You were responsible with the little I gave you, I'll give you more. One comes back, I'm really scared, I don't know what to do, I just kind of hid the money because you're really tough, and I didn't want to hurt you or think that I lost the money. So I didn't do anything with it. You know what? You're a complete idiot. Out the door you go. Because if you knew I was tough, then why didn't you at least give it to the bankers? And even though, well, now it's 0.5%, but even 0.5%, even 0.5% is better than nothing. So, at least I knew if you invested in something and the business went under, at least you knew you tried. You didn't even try. So again, you say you have faith, you say you're my servant, but you didn't even try. And so now you come to the issue. You come to the last of the stories, and that's the judgment of the nations. And he tells us judgment of the nations, and the shepherds got the Lord comes in his glory, and he takes the people of the world and he separates them into 2 groups, like a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And to the one he says, you're going to come into heaven because I was hungry, you gave me to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. And they'll say, we didn't see you. When did we take care of you? What are you talking about? And he'll say, as often as you did it to one of the least of my brothers or sisters, you did it to me. And the others will say, I was hungry, you did not give me something to eat. I was thirsty, you did not give me something to drink. You're going off to hell. And they said, well, wait a minute here. We didn't ever hurt you. We didn't do anything against you. We didn't do it against other people. But you didn't do it for the least of my brothers or sisters. So that's a sin of omission, right? They didn't commit any sin, but they forgot to do something good. So it's a sin of omission. And again, so the judgment is based not upon whether you said, oh yes, Lord, let me into the banquet. The judgment is based upon whether or not you had the works of charity to back you up, whether or not you had a wedding garment of good works, or faith, or love, or acts of charity to show that your faith was real. It's kind of, so the door is open, but if you're going to walk in, you're going to have to be clothed in something, and that clothing is the works that you did with your life. So that goes back to this whole sense of, to go back into Paul and James, you have the sense of faith versus works. But it's not faith versus works. Works shows faith. And as St. James says, faith without works is empty. It means nothing. It's just words. Works doesn't save you. Okay? Faith is what saves you. But if your faith means nothing to you, so that you don't care for other people, you don't help other people, or you don't do the good that needs to be done, then that's not really faith. So faith is only proven by works. So it's not the works that save you, but it is the works that prove your faith. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the teenager news, it's in there all the time.
Okay. It's right out of the Gospels, time after time after time. And Jesus continually assaults people for saying, Lord, Lord, but not doing the work of God. And that's our balance. We can't be confused to think that we need to do this to get into heaven. We need to do this to show that we have the faith to get into heaven. So the works only back up the faith. The faith has to be there and it has to be real. But if faith is real, it will produce works. Any questions about that? Okay. Then next week is chapter 26 and chapter 27. So we're doing the passion and the passion and the death of Jesus. 26 and 27. Much easier than this week, right? 2 chapters, straightforward. I will get this class up online as quick as I can. It took me an extra day last week because something happened with the computer. It was freezing up on me or something.
That happened to mine at work too.
It happens on it. Video programs are memory intensive. So whatever it was, I copied it onto the hard drive and then something was going on and I just had to let it go. I'll get to it the next day. So
That's a virus going on.
no, I don't think it was a virus, but because the video programs are unstable naturally, and when you start talking about an hour's worth of video in high definition, it's a lot. It's memory intensive. They're memory hogs. And I've got a lot of memory on my computer, but it's a memory hog.
Only on your computer?
Well, on my computer. nothing left upstairs. So, any other questions or?
When is the end of the world for 24?
I just want to say,
You said you skipped
when
it.
Clifford was wondering about, going to heaven, that he's a good man. He's worked so well in the sacristy, so I keep praising him for that. So,
Don't praise him too hard, otherwise he'll get all his reward here on earth. He doesn't want his reward on earth.
I'll get too conceited.
Save him something for him to get upstairs. Yes.
I have a question,
Mhm.
and I think we skipped over it. It's chapter 23, the denunciation of the scribes and Pharisees.
The woes, yes.
Okay. On the bottom there, it says, the Pharisees, well, they love places of honor,
Right.
and they like to be seen, and
White their
whatever.
phylacteries, length of their tassels.
And then it says, as for you, do not be called rabbi. You have but one teacher, and you are all brothers. Call no one on earth father. You have but one Father in heaven.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
So why do we call you Father?
No. Do you want the long version or the short version? Okay. So this is all part of the woes or the denunciation of the scribes and the Pharisees, and it's set in. There's 7 of them listed, and they're set in pairs. Okay. So there's kind of 2 at a time until you get to the last one. The one that you're speaking about specifically, as you talk about the various titles of respect and honor. So first of all, let's go with rabbi. Rabbi we always translate as teacher, but the word means "O great one." Okay, "O great one." So when they call Jesus rabbi, I mean this is more than just simply saying to him teacher. This is a real title of respect. Okay, because it takes a great one to be able to teach the law. So rabbi is a very high title when you think about it in terms of titles. So it says, oh, great one. So as Jesus is going through these, first and foremost, the purpose of Jesus to go through all these is to pull back from that avarice that makes us want to grab after things of this world. The widening the phylacteries, making, lengthening the tassels, looking for the place of honor, looking for titles. Whether the title might be a great one or might be father. Because, of course, when you call someone father, you give them a position of authority over you. Okay? So, he's pulling back any kind of avarice that would make us go after these titles. That's the first point that he's trying to make, is that none of this is acceptable. Because, and what he's accusing them of is not using the title. He's accusing them of the avarice. He's accusing them of wanting the title, of wanting the honor, wanting the respect. So he's not saying that the title itself is bad, but he's saying you want these things. And you shouldn't want these things because, first of all, the only ones who deserve these titles, the only one that you really have this relationship to above all else, or the one that you have this relationship to above all else, is the Father in heaven. So to treat me like you would treat the Father in heaven would be completely wrong, would be a horrible thing to do. And for me to want that from you would be a horrible thing for me. Okay? So that's the first part of that is when you look at that, is you have to put the titles in perspective. So, rabbi or teacher, you have one teacher, that is the Messiah. If you don't learn from Jesus, then you shouldn't be learning. Okay? And that's one of the problems, I think, in our multicultural society is we let a lot of people teach us about a lot of things, and we try and bring them all kind of in as if they're all equal, not realizing that the teachings of Christ must always be atop everything else. And that we should have only one relationship to God the Father. So that's the first thing, is we have to maintain that perspective. Who's our teacher? Who's our Father? Who do we serve? Now, in terms of why the church uses the title, why the title is accorded, there is any number of reasons that you go into that. One is the priest, because he stands in persona Christi. Okay, so at the altar, while I represent the offerings of the people, I'm saying the words of Christ. And I'm really, in a sense, representing Christ to all of you, as well as using the words of Christ to present that offering once more to the Father. So because the priest stands in persona Christi, the people accord him that title, not because I am in any way like the Father, but because I might lead you to the Father. Okay? The title has been used by Christians as early as St. Paul. So, if this were, and St. Paul, of course, is writing earlier than the Gospel is writing. So if St. Paul talks to Timothy as his spiritual father, and Onesimus, he's like a son to me. If he talks about his relationships to his spiritual companions in such a way, and of course, Jesus' point is that we're all equal to one another. We're all disciples. Me, you, all of them, we're all disciples of the Lord. But when St. Paul writes, even before the Gospel is written, and he speaks of the spiritual fatherhood and this relationship, he's talking about the closeness that some disciples have one to another, that we learn from one another. And so that we truly learn from this person or that person. So Timothy, Onesimus truly learned from Paul in such a way that he cared for them in such a way that he wanted to watch their spiritual growth. In the same way, you know what priest you want to call father and which priest you don't want to call father, because there are some who really care for you and you think really guide them along. They help you in your life, and so they're the ones that you want to call father because they bring you that relationship that says, I get closer to God with this. There are others who might be good priests in many ways, but you don't necessarily have a relationship with them, and you give them the title father because it's a tradition, it's common respect, but you don't have that real relationship that says, this one is guiding me in any way. So part of it is the title's been used as long as the church has been around, even before the Gospels were. It was kind of codified in about the 3rd, 4th century. And as we look at the early leaders of the church who really kind of wrote down the various theology and helped us understand more specifically who Christ is, when you talk about things like the incarnation and the union of God and man, we talk about them as the fathers of the church. The patriarchs of the church, unlike the patriarchs of Israel, who are simply biological fathers, these are the ones who guided us to know Christ more fully. And so we talk about them as the church fathers. So it was kind of codified within that time frame between 200 and 400 as we were getting to those early church fathers. Even as early also as St. Ignatius and St. Polycarp were referred to as fathers by their, they were bishops by their people. And where St. Paul had that relationship as father, son to just a couple of people that he really felt close to, the bishops, those well-loved bishops like Ignatius and Polycarp, they were called father by all their people because they really felt that kind of relationship. They really felt that they were guiding them in this Catholic faith. So that's where the title comes from. So it's not in opposition to the gospel per se, although literally if you look at it as it stands, if you read the gospel as it stands, it looks like it's not what Jesus is asking us to do. And I have no problem if somebody just calls me Nick, because especially if there's a biblical point of view that says, okay, I can't do that, I'm not supposed to do that. But when you look at the passage, you have to look at the whole passage and not just that part of the sentence. And the whole passage is, you're so avaricious that you're looking for all these titles, you're looking for all this respect, you're looking for all these places of honor, and you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't allow, you shouldn't let anyone call you father, you shouldn't let anyone call you rabbi, because that's just bringing you to the wrong place. It's bringing you to the wrong understanding. So, does that make sense? So, in a sense, it's really up to from my point of view, it's really up to the people. The official title, and I've had conversations with people about this before in terms of people have sent me letters and said, they're just a father, Nicholas Desmond. I said, that's not the title. The title is Reverend. It's the same title that every other minister has. It's Reverend. That's the title for a minister. If you call me Father, it's usually a personal address. So inside the letter, you might say, Dear Father Nick, or, but you never would address the letter to Father Nicholas Desmond. And I just signed a petition, and I saw these priest names. And I said, why do you have Father after all the priest names and Reverend by all the ministers' names? And they said, well, because they're priests, we wanted to. I said, that's not proper. They're reverends also. And otherwise you're setting them apart and making it look like, we claim a title that we don't claim. It's one that's being given to us because of our place in terms of liturgy and responsibility in Christ.
Would a brother be a reverend?
No,
No.
because a brother's not ordained.
Oh, he's not ordained.
No, a brother is committed to religious life, but he's not ordained. So, only for the sisters, the leader of the community would be called the Reverend Mother, but the other sisters are not Reverend Sister. But the leader of the community would be the Reverend Mother. But otherwise, the brothers are not. And if there were a leader of the community who is a Reverend Brother, that would be possible too, but normally they wouldn't be.
The brothers teach, they can't say Mass.
They don't say Mass, they teach, they work in hospitals, they work in parishes, they do many things. Yeah, they do many things besides schools, but because they're not ordained, they don't have a sacramental aspect to their ministry. And it's like deacons are Reverend Mister, because they are ordained deacons, but they're at the diaconate level, not at the priesthood level. So their title would be Reverend Mister as just opposed to Reverend. So, and the bishops would be Most Reverend.
So you don't say reverend brother.
Thank you, Father.
You're welcome. Okay, so I think we're at everything, and I even got into a little bit into the woes then, thank you. So we didn't skip too much of it. So we can do the passion, the death and passion. Thank you so much for the soup.
Yes.
And we'll see you next week. And did we figure out what's happening?
Mimi's.
Mimi, thank you, Mimi.